Hello, YouTube. Welcome to my channel. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. If you have, welcome back. Thanks for joining. Today, I am honored and delighted to have a special guest. I'm doing a kind of visual version of my podcast. If you haven't already listened to my podcast, it's called Let's Talk with Lee Peart, where I interview famous faces and interesting people. So do go and check it out. You can check it out on any podcast providers. And there are also audio videos on my channel here in YouTube. But today, I'm doing a special visual version of the podcast. And I am delighted to have my guest today, Matthew Hodson. So a virtual round of applause for Matthew. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, Lee. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. I had to do this visually to have your delightful face on the screen.
I think I have a face for podcasts.
It's all changing now. It's all changing. Where are you in the world?
I'm in Clapham. I'm in London.
Oh, over in London. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for joining. The reason I've asked you here today is because, weirdly, we've never actually met in person, but I do feel I know you. I stumbled across you on Twitter not too long ago, actually. And I really enjoy the work that you do and also that you're doing. And I wanted to just have a bit of a casual chat and talk about you, talk about life, and see where it goes.
Okay, then. Sounds good to me.
But firstly, I want to ask, as I said, more about you. Where are you from, Clapham, or you just live there?
I'm I was born in Wandsworth. So like, I'm one of those awful people who've like moved about 3 miles in my whole life, which makes me feel like a complete failure. But then as a gay man in London, there aren't actually that many of us who were actually born here. So I kind of still feel like I'm a little bit special because, you know, I'm actually from around these parts, whereas most gay men in London have moved here. So, yeah. And it's one of the greatest cities in the world. Why would I move?
Exactly. And Clapham is very...
it's full of absolutely obnoxious people. And everyone tells me how vile all the Clapham gays are. And I'm like, yeah, I'm here for that.
Well, I used to, because obviously I'm not in London at the minute, but I used to live North London, and I'd go down to Clapham now and then. I'd go south of the river, and it'd be like Grind Alive. Honestly, everyone, it was full of gays. So, do you ever have that kind of feeling where you're like, I was here first. I was actually born here. Thanks, guys.
The whole time. And I feel like I should, you know, every time I go into a bar, I expect the whole bar to stand up and kind of, you know, welcome me and like, you know, he's back, you know, and then I take my place with a little plaque on it. No, yeah, I mean, it's not just the gays in Clapham. I mean, the heterosexual men in Clapham are also of an extraordinarily high quality. And, you know, so it's a fun place to live for that reason.
Perfect. Well, we'll try and get a sponsor from the Clapham Tourist Board. I'm sure they'll be like, yeah, great. Okay, it's for everyone. So you grew up. So you're a Southerner. You grew up in London. Tell me about you're also an actor turned activist turned back actor, right?
Well, yeah. I trained as an actor. I went to university and studied philosophy and sociology, which equipped me for being an actor. So then I went to drama college and I was a relatively unsuccessful actor for many years, but I did do like a bit of West End and I did a bit of film and TV and lots of... I did The Mousetrap, yeah. Yeah, I played the gay one in The Mousetrap. And then what actually happened was I got diagnosed with HIV, and because an actor's life is difficult, you know, it's like you're going from audition to audition, you don't know where the next job's coming from, and I just felt that I couldn't carry on being an actor with everything else that I was going through emotionally, because, you know, being diagnosed with HIV was quite different back in the last millennium, and so I decided to give it up, and I found other work, and I've been relatively successful in that, I guess. And then about 5 years ago, I got contacted by a young writer called Patrick Cash, and he asked me if I wanted to be in a show of his called The Clinic, in which I was asked to play this kind of very kind of vile, hypocritical, drug-addicted banker who was in complete denial about his recent HIV diagnosis. So it was the polar opposite of who I am. And I played that, and got some really nice reviews, which was good. And I kind of felt like, oh, I really want to do a bit more of this. And so I did another 3 shows, I think it is, with Patrick. And we did the TV series, The Grass is Always Grinder, which is available. Sorry? Yeah, well, that's, we shot it, we've started shooting it 2 years ago. And then we can like released like 3 episodes, and then that was kind of quite successful. So then we shot another 10 episodes, but the version which is now on Amazon Prime is a slightly different edit. So it's 7 episodes, and the first 2 episodes of that 7 episodes are what was our season 1, and the others are what was our season 2. So if you have Amazon Prime in the US or the UK, you can watch the whole 7 episodes, and I'm in every single one of them. I'm not the lead. I'm just like, I'm just that cool, supporting, nice guy doctor person.
Isn't that the best part? Isn't that always the best?
Well, yeah, I don't know. The character I play in that is so nice, and I really like playing villains.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In the clinic, I was definitely the villain. But actually, that's not entirely true, because in Chemsex Monologues, I played this really, really nice guy, and he was very camp and very just full of optimism and hope. And actually, the experience of playing him was really good for me, because I was just like, actually, it's really nice to go and spend an evening being full of optimism and hope, and not full of anger and regret, like I usually am in my life. And I think that actually helped me become more positive and hopeful just by playing him, because it was nice being him for a bit.
And so you touched on it at the start there, and that was the reason I kind of wanted to get you here today, because something that is very close to my heart, but I know even closer to yours, because you are experiencing it and now you do it for work as well, is to talk about HIV and AIDS. And one thing that struck me over the past few months, we talk of the one epidemic that's currently going on right now in everyone's mind is COVID-19. And of course, HIV is still around, and it's something that this kind of came for me as inspiration, because I was chatting to one of my gay friends not so long ago, and he's the same age as me. So I'm 30. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 53.
53. You wouldn't know.
I know. It's fucking.
You look great.
Sorry, I'm allowed to swear. Oh, thank you.
Fuck you, one.
Jolly good. Okay, yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. When I was diagnosed, so I was diagnosed in 1998, and at that we've had effective treatment for HIV since 1996. But in 1998, it was like 18 months after the conference, the Vancouver conference, which said we can now treat HIV. You won't die. We've got something that works. But we didn't know at that point that it would be like equal life expectancy, which is now what we should expect if we have diagnosed HIV and have access to the treatment.
Yeah.
So when I got diagnosed, and I was 32 at the time, something like that, 32, I think. And I kind of thought, well, this is going to take quite a few years off my life. And so I just thought 50 is the goal. I want to get to 50 if I can. And then when I did get to 50, it was, I mean, in many ways, it was like, wow, this is fantastic. I've got there. Not only have I got here, but I feel like I've got petrol in the tank. I feel like I'm going to go on for quite a bit longer. At the same time, it also, now, because we have equal life expectancy, if you are diagnosed promptly and you have access to treatment and you take your treatment, there's no reason why you shouldn't live just as long as someone who is HIV uninfected. But when you kind of get that, and you get the enormity of that, and I feel the burden of the privilege that I have as someone who was born in a specific time, so that when I was diagnosed, I had access to treatment, and as someone who's born in a specific country where I have access to treatment, and I don't take that lightly. I recognize it's an enormous privilege that actually I will survive, that I have equal life expectancy, and I think it's a disgrace that still we look at 690,000 HIV related deaths last year, and all of those deaths are preventable. And that's what fills me with fire still, that that people are not being treated for HIV when HIV is an immensely treatable condition.
Yeah, and have you felt over the past few months that, which is what I felt, which is one of the reasons I reached out to you, this kind of anger over everyone focusing rightly on this new virus that is around, but also just taking, almost kind of ignoring everything else that's going on. And like you said, it's treatable. We know how to treat it. Why are those statistics still there? What's gone wrong?
There's a real fear that the data for next year, or this year, which will come out next year, will be even worse, because certainly in a lot of countries where they went into lockdown, and actually then people couldn't access, because we have good infrastructure here in the UK, so you can get your treatment posted to you, but in some countries you can't get your treatment posted to you. And it's people who are used to traveling for like 2 days to get their treatment, and then where you're under lockdown, you're not allowed to go out, and if you do go out, you have to present papers as to why you're going out. And obviously, if people are not open about their HIV status, which because of the stigma, people may not be, this is creating real problems, as well as all the pressures which are put on health services. So, I'm really anxious that that the impact of COVID is going to be seen in the excess mortality for other conditions because of this strain that was put on healthcare systems and because of the lack of access to treatment. So, I think that's certainly an issue, but I wouldn't want to downplay the severity of COVID. This is my second pandemic, I kind of would have been quite happy if I'd not lived through any, and to kind of get to the second one, it's like, damn. But we learned really valuable lessons from HIV, and I see the work of UNAIDS, and I see activists and organizations, and they're talking about how we can utilize those lessons. And those lessons are: don't leave people behind, involve patients in their own healthcare, involve them in their decision making, look out especially for marginalized communities. And all of these lessons are the lessons that we learned from HIV. Don't shame people. That isn't going to work. That's not effective public health. So there's so many really valuable lessons which can make this epidemic not as bad as the last one if we know to utilize them.
Yeah, I watched a video with a few scientists the other day, and one of the things that really struck me is they did say, have we learned nothing from HIV, of this stigmatizing individuals for getting COVID?
Yeah.
It's like it's their fault, the same way that people did for HIV.
Absolutely. And I think there's this other thing which I was very conscious of when COVID started in Western Europe, and there was kind of some talk of well, we'll just let it work through society until we have herd immunity. And they knew when they said let it work through society that it wasn't a case of everyone just kind of being okay. It was a case of it will kill off the most vulnerable. It was a calculation that was based on the idea that some lives are more valuable than others. And we saw that with HIV, and we saw remnants of that with COVID. And we still see discussion of that with COVID, as if some lives are less valuable. And I think this very idea that some lives have more value than others is at the heart of so much of the struggles that we're facing right now. And this is why it's so important that we talk about Black Lives Matter, because it actually is a response to this suggestion that they don't matter, or they don't matter as much. And that's why we see incredible health inequalities, particularly along racial lines. And it's really important that we address those issues right now.
Absolutely. And you're the executive director of NAM,
Hmm.
the AIDS map. Was that the national AIDS manual? Am I right in saying that?
That's right. Yeah.
That's the
So
old name.
a long, long time ago, it was a ring binder folder. It was set up by volunteers at London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard, and it was set up in 1987 because that was the year that they had the iceberg and tombstone adverts come out. And so they had this incredible doom-laden imagery, like, there is a killer, blah, 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 blah. And tombstones crashing down, and everyone's completely petrified. And people knew that it was affecting gay men and bisexual men more than other communities. And they ring up Lesbian and Gay Switchboard, or it may have been called Gay Switchboard at the time, I'm not entirely sure. And Gay Switchboard were like, well, I don't know, we've read the government leaflet, and that's pretty much all the information we've got as well. And so, like, we need to have really good, solid, accurate information so that we can talk to people who are ringing us up petrified. And so they set about researching, and they created this ring binder folder.
An actual manual.
It was an actual manual, so that when people called up Switchboard, they could say, hold on, I will look up oral sex. Yes, maybe you need to be concerned. We later found out you didn't need to be that concerned about it. And that was, and so actually that manual had these like pages in it, and then they started distributing it to other helplines around the country. So it was the National AIDS Manual. And then that became a separate charity from Switchboard. Yeah. And now I head it up.
Wow, amazing. It's online now.
It's all online. It's huge, and it's international. And we have people who use our services from all around the world, and they are people who are living with HIV, and they are people who care for people living with HIV, not just healthcare providers, but also their family and their friends. And we provide really rigorously accurate information and news about HIV. And before I joined NAM, it was my go-to source of information, and I am so proud to be a part of it because it's the gold standard. I mean, it's really good. If you have any question about HIV, I mean, obviously I'm biased. I run the organization, but it's really high quality, accessible information. And one of the things which I've been really keen on doing is making sure that that information is as accessible to as many people as possible. And that's why we've been doing a lot more video work and a lot more illustrative work, because I know that, some people want to sit down, they want to read a big article. Other people, they'd much rather watch a bit of television, and so like, let's look at all those different ways we can get information out there.
Yeah.
And I guess that's also why I do the Twitter thing, because that's getting information out there. Plus, I can just post pictures of myself not wearing many clothes, and that's kind of fun.
It's a win-win situation for everyone.
Apart from I do have to put, like, I meet people in like really formal meetings, and then they go, oh yeah, I follow you on Twitter, and then I feel like, oh, okay.
I recognize those texts anyway. I want to, because knowledge is power, and it sounds so cliche to say that, but this is the only reason really that I want to talk to you directly, because it baffled me that a couple of gay friends who I know didn't know about this. And then I kind of just thought, well, I you don't get really taught it in school or anything like that. I found out because I did work with Manchester Pride, and I worked with George House Trust, another amazing charity. And I learned kind of through osmosis really there. But some people don't have that privilege. And then not just gay men, but straight people who just don't know anything a lot of the time about it, so to have this website where you can just go on, have a look, you've got like bite-sized fact info sheets and everything like this, and also to have people like yourself so active on Twitter, and also through the charity, not just for the gym selfies, which it's great, but actually in a weird way, not in a weird way at all, it's great. You're still doing work by posting stuff like those gym selfies, because I guess for people who don't know about HIV, the one thing I think they would assume is to see a picture of a frail person suffering from this terrible virus, and actually you are 53 years old and the picture of health, posting your muscle body and everything else over Twitter. So is that something that drives you to post it, or is it just pure vainness?
It's probably a bit of both, isn't it? I mean, I was quite active on Twitter for years before I ever posted a gym selfie, and I did. I just kind of, well, I mean, you know, but okay, absolute truth. So I had just done a show, and in this show I played someone who was 64. And I got cast in it, and I was like a little bit like, I wasn't offended because it was a really great role, and I was really happy to play it. But a little bit of me was like, why am I being asked to play a 64-year-old man?
Yeah.
And then there was a lot of this kind of like stuff kind of going on about like kind of like, you know, this cast of talented, hot young actors and Matthew Hodson. And I was like, I mean, I'm sorry. I still think I've got it going on. And I stood in the gym and I looked at myself in the mirror and went, you got it going on. So I took a photo, like gay men sometimes do, and I posted it. And it was like I got a much bigger instant reaction to that particular tweet than I'd had done to a lot. And I thought, oh, well, I can use this. And I think a lot of what I talk about on Twitter is about life expectancy. And it's about the importance of physical activity, particularly if you're living with HIV, because a lot of the things that strike you down if you are living with HIV, which may be heart conditions or osteoporosis or stress, depression, and anxiety, these are all conditions which can be challenged by being physically active. So it's a really powerful health message for people living with HIV. It's like, you know, I mean, I go to the gym. I enjoy going. Well, I used to go to the gym, and I now just work out from home because COVID. But I enjoy working out. It's actually something I think is fun, and I like the impact it has on my body. But you know, dance or run or walk or you know, garden or whatever it is that you enjoy doing. But you know, stay physically active. It's after taking your treatment, it's the most important thing you can do for your health as someone living with HIV or as someone who's aging. And I'm aging and I'm living with HIV. I think there's another thing, which is as a gay man. I mean, there's the double thing, the double whammy I've got living with HIV, and you know, you would have to be blind to be living with HIV, to be openly living with HIV, and not notice the stigma which people with HIV still encounter. You know, that whole, well, you know, I wouldn't have sex with you. I'm only interested in men who are clean. God, that one drives me nuts. You know, and that whole like anti-HIV thing, and it's very closed-minded. So, you know, as someone who's living with HIV, well, you're not attractive. Or as a gay man who is now over the age of 50, well, you know, you're not attractive. And I don't need to be attractive to everyone. I mean, I haven't got the time for that. But I don't want to be desexualized as a result of those things. So I kind of feel like, well, screw it. You know, I still think I've got sexual currency, and I'm going to celebrate that. And if people agree, great. But you know, it's about kind of like sending out a kind of a positive screw you image. You know,
Amazing.
would you turn this down? You'd be insane.
Exactly. Well, no, it is true, and you know, it's one of those things where, like I say, you post that on your Twitter, and regardless of why you do it, I mean, I'll post a shirtless selfie here and there, and it's
Thank you for it.
Yeah. Well, I have to make sure I get the right lighting and everything.
Oh yeah.
But for you, it has the double whammy effect of going, hey, here's a person living with HIV. It's not affecting me physically, and here's the proof. The proof is in the pudding. I want to go back to 1998. You touched on it earlier, and when you said about having a target to 50, how did that feel back at, when you were there, when you had that? I can't imagine having that thought in your head of going, right, let's try and get to 50. How did that feel?
Well, I mean, 50, as I say, at the time, it kind of felt like it could be a bit of a reach.
Yeah.
But I mean, I lived through the 80s and the early 90s, and you know, a lot of my friends died, and that's just what. Someone said to me the other day. They said I was kind of like posting photos of myself on various kind of gay rights marches and things like that from the 80s and 90s, and they said, wow, you know, your 20s was full of kind of activism and heroics, and I said, well, it didn't feel heroic at the time because my friends were dying. So it just felt like this is what you do. You fight for your friends. That was what it was about. And yeah, I didn't feel self-pity at the thought that I wouldn't live to 50. I felt grateful that I would live as far as that. And now surprised that I'm looking at that total in the rear view mirror, as it were. But yeah, I mean, it's death for a gay man in the 1980s and 1990s. Death was just a part of our lives, and I think I know that when I talk about that, I know that for some younger gay men, it's a real turn off. Yeah, and they're like, oh, that's your problem. But I see that same experience of grief and loss with chemsex now, to be honest.
Just before you actually talk about chemsex, because there will be people watching this that have no idea what chemsex is.
Right. So chemsex is it's the use of particular drugs which enhance sexual desire, but can have a terrible impact upon people's mental health and physical health, and can result very easily in overdose, particularly with G, and as a result can result in death. And I've, having lost so many friends to HIV and AIDS in the 1980s and 90s, I've more recently lost friends to chemsex, and some of them, people who are around in the 80s and 90s along with me, and who perhaps they didn't expect to live as long as they did do. And then I think often people go into chems because they're not happy with themselves, because they want to be out of their heads for a bit. And I think that often comes out of insecurity, and sometimes that I don't ever want to deny the fact that the drugs make people feel good, and that's it. I don't think it's surprising that people take drugs. If you feel unconfident about your body, or you feel unconfident about your ability to have sex, or to to give pleasure, and you take a drug and it makes you feel like you're the biggest stud in the universe, then of course you're going to do it. But we have to be really careful to educate people of the possible harms, and to look at ways we can reduce those harms. Yeah, because it's another epidemic.
We're slightly running out of time, but I asked before you were coming on a lot of subscribers and some of my followers on Twitter and Instagram for questions for you. I also wanted to reiterate, which we haven't touched on, which I think a lot of people will just assume, but obviously this isn't HIV, and it sounds so obvious to say here, but for some people they just don't know it. It's not just a gay virus, which I think still a lot of people think it is. Obviously, yes, a lot of gay men died from it, and obviously get it, but it's not exclusive to gay people, is it?
No, and globally, the majority of people living with HIV are heterosexual. But I mean, I think, well, I mean, in England, the first wave hit gay and bisexual men in particular, and it also hit migrant communities, and it's still very, very, prevalence is really high within migrant communities in the UK, and amongst gay and bisexual men, and amongst trans people, trans men and trans women.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, I had a question from Elaine, and she's asked, she wants to know, how has life changed, in your opinion, surrounding the perception of HIV in the gay community? And I know you slightly touched on it earlier, but how within the gay community, with other gay men, and I guess within the LGBTQ plus community?
I'm going to give the hopeful answer here, because I think there have been times where I've kind of gone, really, are we still stigmatizing people with HIV? But actually, let's give the hopeful answers. I see more people now kind of adopting that. What's your no-go areas in terms of dating? And it's like, I would never be able to date someone who was racist. I mean, you wouldn't want to be with that person. And I see people doing a similar thing around people who stigmatize people living with HIV and saying, look, if you put, I'm clean, you be too on your dating profile, then you're a bit of a jerk, to be honest, and I don't really want to be around you. I think the really exciting news from just a couple of years ago is we got the results of the Partner 2 study. And the Partner 2 study established, beyond any real scientific doubt, that if someone is undetectable on HIV treatment, which is the goal of HIV treatment, and when they're virally suppressed on HIV treatment, then there is no risk of transmission during sex. Zero. None at all. Whether there are STIs present or whether you don't need to use condoms, that HIV can't be transmitted by someone who's undetectable.
It's impossible.
It never has happened. We don't believe it ever will happen. It's, we talk about sexual safety, and PrEP is like really effective, and we need to celebrate that. But actually, PrEP is 99.999% or whatever effective. U equals U, undetectable, no risk whatsoever. And that makes a huge difference, because a lot of that stigma, which we see especially in the gay community towards people living with HIV, comes from a place of fear. It comes from, well, I wouldn't want to have sex with you because I might become infected. And it's like, if you won't become infected as a result of me, because I am not only HIV positive, but I'm HIV diagnosed, I am HIV on treatment, and I am HIV undetectable. Undetectable means untransmittable. U equals U. And it's such an important message. And it's such an exciting message to share as well, because often people don't know about it. And you go, when I tell people and they say they haven't heard, I'm like, brilliant, I've done a good thing today.
So many people don't know about it. Straight friends that I've told, they're like, what, really? And the strangeness of it all is, it's probably more risky. Well, it is more risky to have sex with someone who doesn't know their status and hasn't been regularly getting STI and blood tests and checking their status, than it is to have sex with someone who knows their status and they're at an undetectable level, because the treatment brings it down so minimal that it just can't be passed on.
Yeah, that's right. And the shadow of those tombstone adverts, we've all been living in it, and it's been a real, I think one of the things which I really try and do through Twitter, through just being visible, is to kind of break free from that and say HIV has changed.
Yeah. Chelsea Girl asks, she wants to know, so she actually sent me this in an email. She said she grew up in the 80s when HIV was viewed as the inevitable death sentence for everyone who contracted it. And she says she knows now that there are medicines that we just discussed that help the carrier to live a normal life. But she asks, is that the case for everyone? She wants to know, does it work on everyone? Or are there some treatments that just don't work?
The thing is, now we've got a range of treatments. So, I mean, obviously everyone is different, and you put what one person's going to respond better to aspirin, and another person's going to respond better to Nurofen or whatever. And it's similar with HIV treatments. Our bodies are different, so we will respond differently to different things. But we now have enough different kinds of treatment so that if you're put on a treatment and it doesn't work for you, they'll shift you to a different one. And I don't think that really we think that there is anyone who is untreatable. It may take a little while to find the right treatment for you. Yeah. But every year, treatments get better. We refine it. We refine the dosing. When I got diagnosed, I really thought that, when I got diagnosed, I thought I was going to have like kind of visible symptoms of HIV infection or of the treatment, because the side effects were pretty bad back then. But the side effects are actually pretty negligible now. I mean, they're, like a lot of the drugs which we take on a regular basis, like aspirin, it's like it can have side effects, but it doesn't mean to say that you need to suffer those side effects. It's one of the things which we do on the AIDS map, of course, is that we do talk about what you should look out for if you have side effects, and how you may be able to change your treatment regimen so that you don't. So, I mean, really, it is that good now that there's no one who should not be able to achieve viral suppression on the drugs we have now.
We have to very quickly as well talk about PrEP.
Yes.
My eyes light up when I say that. Because people won't know, again, what PrEP is, and it is a relatively new drug that's come out. Can you explain succinctly, because obviously there's more information on NAM's website surrounding it, PrEP. What is PrEP?
So PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. So it basically means you take some HIV drugs, and when you take these drugs, if you are then exposed to someone through sex or through any other means, really, who has HIV, who has unsuppressed HIV, you won't become infected. It's really effective. It's like, as I say, it's like more than 99% effective. There've been a couple of cases where someone who seems to have been adherent to their PrEP has become infected, but I wouldn't want to talk about that really, because that's a distraction. Because I would pretty much guarantee it will work for you if you take it. And this is fantastic, because it means that we are now at the point where we can really end this epidemic. Because if everyone who has HIV is tested, if they're positive, put them on treatment, they'll become undetectable. They will not be able to pass the virus on. If they're negative, and if they're going to potentially expose themselves to someone who is HIV positive and virally unsuppressed, they can go on PrEP, and that will prevent them from ever becoming infected. So we can really end this epidemic very simply. Testing is the start. Everyone should test.
And I guess that's the epitome of prevention is better than the cure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually, when a few years back, a nurse spoke to me about PrEP, and I didn't know what it was. And she said because of what you slightly touched on there, there's been a couple of kind of sketchy cases where they're not too sure. They're not allowed to say officially that it's that 100%. But she then was basically like, it is basically.
It basically is. And now you can get it on the NHS in England. So, everyone out there who is worried about HIV, and if you're in a high risk, particularly if you're in a high risk community, go to the clinic, get tested. If you're negative, say, right, sign me up for PrEP now.
And you take one pill every day.
One pill every day. If you have a frequent risk, basically if you only have sex at the weekends or once a month or whatever, you can actually take the PrEP around the time when you're going to have sex. So that way you have less drugs which you need to take, which for some people they prefer. Some people would prefer to take it every day because it's easy to remember once a day. Yeah. So it's up to you. Both systems work. Both systems are very effective. Well, they really work for men. For cis men, they work. If you're not a cis man, you're probably better off taking it every day.
And finally, this is probably a bit of a stupid question.
There are no stupid questions.
Well, it's not a stupid question, actually, and it's actually been asked by someone here. So sorry, I'm just basically slagging off their question. But it's not a stupid question in terms of, Kaz basically says, have you been discriminated at work because of it? Now, the reason I was going to say it's a stupid question now is because you currently work for a charity. But before that, have you ever had it?
Well, no, because so when I got diagnosed, I was working at the Museum of London, and my best friend wasn't living in England at the time, and so I emailed him to say, "Oh my God, this has happened, and my life is falling apart," kind of thing. And I accidentally CC'd a colleague of mine. And my friend, fortunately, even though he was in a different time zone, got the email straight away and replied and said, "You do realize you've CC'd someone."
And how did they react?
Well, I mean, my heart just, I thought I was going to vomit at my desk all over my keyboard. It would have been terrible. And I ran into this other person's office and I said, "You've just got an email from me. Have you read it?" And they said, "No." And I said, "Please, just can you delete it?" Because I was not ready at that point to tell anyone. And they told me they did. So I assumed that they did. And I never disclosed my HIV status in that work, and then since then I've actually been working within HIV, so I've not personally encountered it. But you have rights if you are living with HIV. They cannot discriminate against you in the workplace. So check your rights. You can find that information on AIDSmap.
And then very quickly, because people who are watching this I know we've talked about COVID. It's one of those boring things that I'm so sick of talking about, but it is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Someone asked me, I can't remember who it was, so I do apologize, about COVID and HIV. Does having HIV mean you are more vulnerable? Would that put you in a vulnerable category?
We think at the moment it doesn't put you in a particularly vulnerable category. There is some small evidence which suggests that maybe a slightly higher risk of death if you're living with HIV, but it's probable that that slightly higher risk of death, which we've seen it from some studies and not from others, but there's some UK data which suggests it, and there's some data from South Africa which suggests it. However, it's likely that the slight increase in risk is more related to other conditions which you may have, or maybe more likely to have.
Sorry, love. This is the Zoom syndrome and virtual social distance electronic. You were talking conditions you were more likely to have.
Yeah, there are some conditions which you're more likely to have if you're living with HIV. You are slightly more likely to have diabetes, for example, and diabetes is associated with more severe COVID.
Right.
So when you look at kind of HIV as a risk factor for severe illness, it's really low down. So I would say the most important thing, if you're living with HIV and if you're concerned about COVID, it's always make sure that you're virally suppressed, which means keep taking the medication.
Yeah.
But really, if you're virally suppressed and if you don't belong to any other group which has a higher risk of severe illness, you should be as fine as anyone else is. But still take all the usual precautions. Wash your hands. Don't snog strangers, or think about it before you snog a stranger, because you're going to be taking a risk. I mean, not great, but it's hilarious for someone who lived through the 80s and 90s and all of that safe for sex information. It was like, you can't fuck without condoms, blah, 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 but kissing is fine. With COVID, you can fuck without condoms. You just can't kiss each other. It's like, like the whole thing's on its head. I don't know where. So you got to decide what you want to risk.
Don't kiss me. You might have COVID.
Don't kiss me, but up the
arse. Matthew, thank you so much for joining and having this chat. The Grass is Always Grinder. It's out on Amazon Prime right now. Is it also on YouTube?
It was on YouTube, yeah. I think the edit's a bit better on Amazon Prime. So
okay.
I hope Dean Street won't kill me for saying it, but I'd say watch it on Amazon Prime.
Watch it on Amazon Prime. I'm going to go and do that. Also, NAM AIDSmap website. Do go on if anyone's watching this and wants more information, whether you're gay, straight, bi, trans, whatever, do go on. It's got so much info. What is, before you go, the one thing that you would like people to take away from this chat, or just a general message about HIV that you would like people who are watching this to remember?
I would say the big piece of information I would want people to know is that people who are on HIV treatment can have long, healthy, happy lives, and we are not a sexual risk of transmission. So HIV's changed.
So remember that. Thank you so much, Matthew. It's been a pleasure. At Matthew_Hodson, if anyone wants to see those gym selfies. And surrounded by an epitome of knowledge about HIV. Thanks so much for joining, Matthew.
Thanks so much, Lee.
Take care.
And you. Bye.